This time we confront a number of boxes, and the boxes they came in. It'll get more interesting. You'll have to take my word for that. I've not forgotten about the next part of the Searchlight installation and its housing, but each time I'm about to do the glassing work, I find a key item of equipment is located somewhere I'm not. In the meantime, Alan has been troubled by rogue water situations. The first is one I mentioned a couple of episodes ago. Water's been collecting at the base of the hatch. You may think, so what? But it'll be a pain when the hatch is open, both when moored and underway. Movement will slosh it into the cabin, and anyone climbing in and out is guaranteed to soak their elbows, cuffs or knees. I called for all manner of solutions, and you lot didn't disappoint me. You'll be devastated to know I vetoed some of the vastly over-engineered ideas. I also discounted installing a flap around the hatch edge. It would need to create a perfect seal to work, would actually slow water egress, and would get in the way of the otherwise minimalist hatch's ease of operation. I'm going to make a drain, and I'm going to try and make that interesting. I have bought a number of components, and these are they. I bought some hose tails. These are stainless steel. They're hose tail on both ends, the same diameter, so that will simply fit onto this silicone hose we have here. And then also, because these Y junctions in stainless steel were ridiculously expensive, I've got myself a brass one. And because they're not going to be touching anything, and they're not going to be touching each other, that's fine. There won't be any galvanic disasters, which I know that a lot of you get extremely excited about. I've not used the grinder in recent weeks with the frantic regularity you've come to expect of me, so I'm healing that wound, outside in the glorious spring sun, that sort that is typical in England. The hose tails both need to be shortened, and angled so that they sit flush when installed into the hatch surround. I suppose there may well be one already in existence, but there should be a book dedicated to the artistry, the triumphs, and the pitfalls experienced only by those who have picked up a grinder and truly set it to work. On this occasion, I stayed on the tracks. A cut-off wheel to get the shape, and then a flap disc to deburr and smooth it all off. These are a fraction wider than a centimetre in diameter. When installed into the fiberglass, I want a tight fit. But, like most sensible people, I lack an 11mm drill bit. My idea is to try a 10mm drill bit and wiggle it a little. We'll see. In the hatch gutter itself, there will be 2 holes. These clips are here to extravagantly illustrate the genesis of the 2 said holes. The inescapable point of interest here is the angle. I'm pointing both towards the centre of the hatch at a roughly 45-degree angle, so the internal plumbing will be as neat as possible. I've also got myself a smart new mini wide-angle camera, so it's an excuse to deploy that. Not bad dynamic range. Of course, the drill comes right the way through and out the other side of the insulation layer, so I know where to use a sharp knife to slice out the surrounding foam. There's going to be a third hole, this one being the exit drain a few inches lower down. I've gone inside to outside on that one, but ensuring equidistance between the hatch sides is straightforward either way. Each of the 3 holes now has a small zone of clear space inside the boat where the securement and reinforcement can go. It would now be relatively straightforward to tap each of the hose tails into their holes with a few strikes of a hammer, but they need a good adhesive and seal. To protect the bores of the hose tails and the barbs from getting fouled up with errant adhesive, I'm stuffing some spare blue tissue paper down inside and wrapping the exterior of the barbs in cheap duct tape. Then it's time for the main adhesive. The bond is between stainless steel and uncoated fiberglass. I've decided to use JB Weld epoxy for a strong bond and to take care of sealing most of the gap that remains. On the upper sides of the holes, I'll be able to sand the surrounds of the drains flat for later painting. It's a bit tricky with limited visibility, but eventually all 3 are seated properly. The epoxy cures, and then I wanted to make a particularly good seal around the exit port. There was a little flaking of the gel coat when I drilled through, so I'm using a flexible sealant to create extra environmental protection all round. It's paintable sealant, so I may be able to coat it next time I have the orange paint out. Alan's paint is polyurethane, with a little stretch to it, so is ideal for coating sealant without flaking away. Off came the protective gaffer tape, for now, and I found that I still couldn't see properly up into the area where the hose tails were bonded to the hull. The whole area will end up being protected with a foam insulation cover, but this was also an opportunity to tidy up the cuts. I'm afraid that my de-gaffer taping was premature, so on went a couple of silicone tube offcuts as I did the final reinforcement. Again, a good hybrid sealant with a high modulus, and applied liberally around the interface. Epoxy adhesive for the actual steel to glass fibre bond, and then sealant to add bulk support. That's the interior preparation work more or less complete. Outside, the epoxy resin had left a couple of light ridges and bits sticking up. The metal itself was perfectly flush, but to get a nice surface ready for painting, I have this fun spinning grinder that will make short work of the excess epoxy, but not cause more damage than it solves. Before you know it, I was ready to plumb the system together. I showed you the silicone tube back at the beginning. I chose transparent hose so I can see if there are any blockages, and because it's quite satisfying to actually see rain and seawater flow through it. The two input routes can be joined easily with the brass Y-section connection. And there we have it. The tube sits snugly on the hose tails, and I see no reason at this stage to add on compression clips. There'll be no pressure. Time for a test, of course. Water goes in one end and exits the other, and none of the water ends up inside Alan. The angles I chose mean water can't get stuck inside, so I'd call that a success. I've intentionally made the external drain more or less flush with the vertical hull form, so that it's not vulnerable to being thwacked when things and people are being swung around outside. Some may protest at its location, but fear not. A longer tubing route to the side of Alan, or lower down, would just mean more to get damaged. The bow platform will always be wet at sea anyhow, and in fully iced conditions we'd not need the drain, and so can unplug it. And no, that wasn't brand new bottled water. I'm going to cynically stick in the membership donor thingy here. Mainly this is because my audience have been admirably loyal and attentive, resulting in these excellent retention curves, so I'll try and ruin them by doing a commercial bit in the middle. A large portion of what I'm able to do on Alan, in the Arctic, and in producing videos, has been possible due to direct contributions, and not via Patreon or complex donation industry ecosystems with commissions at seemingly every turn. So please do consider membership, aside from one-off assistance, and books, hats, and t-shirts. Cheers. So on to the next and slightly more troubling water situation aboard Alan. Last year I noticed a slow leak through an old hole after a period of rain. It's just to the side of the driving position, coming from an insulated void, very approximately below the old sprinkler system distribution box on the deck. I assumed the box or the hatch was leaking, so I resealed it. I thought it had done the trick, but last week I noticed this on the other side. A rusty drip mark on the galvanised post mount had given away, okay, not a raging torrent, but there's definitely still some water at times between the two shells. I could probably ignore it, but waterlogged polyurethane foam can degrade, and so can fiberglass. You may think that surely the whole void was filled with closed-cell buoyancy foam when manufactured. It should be, but I found that when inspecting inside other theoretically foam-filled voids, that the job they did with the squirty foam machine was, at times, patchy. I have an endoscope, don't ask me why, but I don't think spying up inside will tell me a lot. My plan is to drill through each corner of that lowered part of the deckhead. I don't know what I'll find. Drilling fiberglass is grim enough, but I want to make a 25mm wide hole, so holding a vacuum nozzle nearby isn't enough. Time to improvise. A carrier bag securely taped around the hand drill body means I can move it into a cone shape and collect most of the dust and pieces of laminate as I cut it with a Forstner bit. I didn't have a hole saw of the right size. I found that in the port side stern end, there's indeed some foam missing in the void, so a route for water must exist. The others seem pretty well full up, but I couldn't know until I looked. The laminate thickness also varied a fair bit. This shield idea, though, was remarkably effective. Barely any mess. The majority can be bagged up, and the drill itself vacuumed and wiped clean. I hear you all clamouring to ask what's going to go in these holes. Screw plugs. These will allow me to check at regular intervals and drain if necessary. These are pretty straightforward boating ones with retainers, so you don't lose the plug. Something struck me as I was about to install them. The plastic lip is quite high, and so where the deckhead laminate is thin, this might stop small amounts of water from draining through the bore. I've deployed the grinder once more, therefore. A few notches still allow the screw fitting to work, but can allow more water flow. Next step, a good bead of grab sealant. All the sockets are thereby in place. You may ask why I didn't repair the two seemingly okay holes with fiberglass and set them back to how they were. The answer? This is quicker, and you never know where water will find its way to. The finishing touches, cleaning up the surrounding gel coat of marks and grot, and fixing in the two fixing screws. I made sure they went through sealant, so they aren't a conduit for drips. Of course, I will keep trying to find the source of the leak. Second minor water drama sorted then, I think. There's more though. I'm not going to dedicate a whole episode to remounting the storm-damaged solar panels, so I thought I'd tag it on here. Regular Allen disciples will recall that I stupidly only part stuck them to the hull, expecting them to be fine, and then went abroad whilst the UK had near record ferocity wind speeds across a pair of storms. Back on they go, using pretty much the same procedure as before. I scrape back the paint and gel coat, then sealant goes all around the tops and sides. Along the bottom edges, I've left a few gaps between lines of sealant. This means that if the other three sides aren't a flawless seal, any water can drain out through gravity. I'm going to try and group together the next few episodes regarding the solar system installation and wiring it all up in a comprehensive plan. The external stuff first, then the interface to get the cabling inside, which is actually going to be trickier than you might expect, then the charge controller and battery gubbins. As such, I'll briefly show you now how that inbuilt panel cable shortening that I mentioned in the last episode ended up. The joins were taped up and then bedded in a sort of basic rubber putty that I plan to paint later to look neater. You'll notice the panel still doesn't conform to the full shape of the far bow end. I don't want to contort the panel, so I'm going to build in a robust support underneath so water can drain and so the panel isn't tortured. Ideally, the panels would be a few inches shorter and wider, but that's life. Finally, for this episode, the two bottom MC4 connectors need linking. I've opted not to permanently solder them together or force them into an awkward U-bend, so I can make repairs or changes on the fly. Instead, this. So now I'm going to try and make a connector which attaches those two panels together in series, and I've got a spare cable here which I'm going to cut at the shortest length I can get away with to try and make this as low profile as I possibly can. I don't want it shading the panels or otherwise getting in the way. The soldered joint in this format stops it being sprung loaded or the wires fracturing. All of this rather overfilled a day of work aboard Allen. I'm conscious I have a few concurrent narratives at the moment to tie up. The searchlight, the solar, that extractor fan, remember. I've not forgotten any, and I'll make sure that you won't either. That's it for today. Bye.